So, which of these three, of idea, execution, and market, is actually the most important? One answer is that for anybody who understands any machine learning, the debate is somewhat moot in the sense that whatever your success criteria are, you can assign features to each of these three things and assign coefficients, and those coefficients are probably going to be non-zero on each of them. And that's almost like the non-answer that everything is important and the weightings are all that's there. In addition to that, though, there's maybe two other ways to think about this, or complementary things to think about. The first is something that I think at least a lot about, which I called the idea maze. And the concept here is that there's a distinction between, I've got an idea for doing music and movies on the internet, right? There's a distinction between something like this, which is a one sentence sort of thing, versus an extremely detailed plan for navigating the maze. Okay, and this corresponds to very initial upfront choices: open source versus closed source. Then you go into details. Are you a pay service, or are you free? Are you charging per download or subscription? Are you just doing music only, or music and movies? And if you're doing movies, are you doing some non-Hollywood movies? And all these businesses are actually reasonably successful. I put treasure chests near those that are arguably the most successful. YouTube sold for 1.6 bill. iTunes is arguably the most successful of all the music services, and Netflix is a public company in its own right. Now, these other services are fine. I don't mean anything negative about them, but Napster and Kazaa are dead. And they definitely took the wrong branch in this idea maze. And things, the reason this is a very useful way of thinking about things is that it stresses a few things. First is it stresses that it's not just like a one sentence concept like this. It's a detailed business plan that's aware of all the competition. That's, a plan for navigating the maze. The second is that the maze is time varying. So Pandora became a much better idea once the iPhone came out. There's a mobile computer in every pocket. You can see Tim Westergren's comments on this. It just became a completely different company afterwards. Before it was kind of struggling. Afterwards, it started to actually book some real revenue. And just like there are doors that open, this trap door sort of open, there's other doors that close. There's doors that other companies are capable of bridging that one might not be as a startup. Amazon can get into certain areas that many startups would not be able to. You probably don't want to build AWS or do food delivery as a startup. That's not to say there aren't people trying, and more power to them. Maybe that's easier today than it was some years ago. So maybe that door is open. The thing here about this, though, is it stresses that it's not one sentence, right? If your idea is one sentence, you don't have a good idea. If your idea is a detailed path like this, and if you've got the knowledge of some sort of acronym like KYC, Know Your Customer, or LDT, Laboratory Developed Test, or OTARD, which is the over-the-air reception devices rule. These three regulations, understanding them in detail, is really what enabled those businesses, and were like the key regulations that people outside the industry would not understand were driving them. Very briefly, KYC, Know Your Customer, was a major roadblock for PayPal in the early days because it meant that they had to actually collect all kinds of information on every customer. Like a bank did, except those customers could be in many different countries. LDT, Laboratory Developed Test, this was a route that Genomic Health pioneered to get a test through to market rapidly without as much regulatory overhead as other paths. And the OTARD, over their reception device rule, this is something which Aereo is currently litigating in the courts. Their concept is that they can put antennas in a server farm, and in the 80s it was legalized to record TV over an antenna. Nowadays that same antenna can be in a tiny little solid-state device, and so you can rent your antenna in a server farm and therefore just stream TV. You're basically within the letter of the law, but it's a brilliant hack. That's a good idea, and that's an idea that shows some familiarity with a statute of some kind that other people don't know about. So, when you're thinking about your business concept, think about the idea maze and think about whether there's some acronym where the explanation to someone, really, gets a light bulb event going off, right? That's when you've got something. Related to this is not just, the idea, but the idea maze. In the same way, not just the execution, but the execution mindset, right? And what is the execution mindset? It's very simple to explain. It's very hard to do. The execution mindset basically means writing your to-do list and then doing the next thing that's the highest priority on the to-do list and crossing it off and then repeating that. And this is something which, sounds easy to do, is very hard to do. It's like, get in shape. It's easy to say, it's more challenging to actually do because it means reserves of willpower and so on and so forth. That said, one way to implement this is, something called the one thing. This is something which, is, there's many different ways to organize things within your company. But to get focused, to have the execution mindset, this concept of using Gmail chat status and having like a issue that you're working on is a very, low effort way to broadcast what it is you're currently doing to everybody else at the company. And it also means that they can just click and figure out what it is you're working on without, them bugging you. This way you only maintain this one thing, and then, people kind of know that you're doing something. Okay, so that's execution mindset and the one thing. Let's next talk about what kind of business you want to build.